Welcome back to another episode of Lost in the Farmer's Market Garden Shorts, Winter Edition. We're doing another episode, this time from the lab because it's kinda nice out, despite the fact that we got an obnoxious amount of rain. The headquarters fields are not underwater, thankfully, because we're at high ground, but the production fields, 2 out of 3 were underwater as of yesterday. It's draining, but it's not there yet. So, let's talk about this loveliness. Now, today's topic is Haworthias. Now, I need to start by saying I did do a prior coverage of this specimen here in the last episode, but we're going to do a little bit more about that family in specific. Now, firstly, Haworthias are named after Adrian Hardy Haworth. Haworthia, Haworth, yeah. The classical botanists love to name things after their friends, or they would name things after themselves, which is how we got poinsettias, named for Robert Poinsett. What's interesting about the Haworthias is that very recently the Haworthias have been split into essentially 4 groups. You have the traditional Haworthias, the Astroloba, the Haworthiopsis, which means Haworthiopsis, or if you hear opsis at the end, it means it looks like a. So, good example there with that Latin. Coarctata looks like a tick, referring to the shape of the seed. You've now learned something today. And of course, Tulista, because people love to say Tulista. I actually do like that name. That's kind of saucy. But, skipping the sauce, what we have here for you today, and this, as always, the pointer stick of destiny is with us. This plant, in the back, is my largest singular Haworthia plant, period. Some of you mightn't recognize this. This is Haworthia coarctata. Coarctata means crowded. And as you can see, it's certainly a lot of crowding going on back there. Well, this is what I typically call the dragon Haworthia, or the dragon cactus, because the stems twist and turn and come flying out of the pot, and they look like little lizard arms. This one has produced more cuttings than I care to acknowledge. Possibly hundreds of little baby plants. And I've been selling them for years. And this is the mother plant they all come from. It's never been on film or been photographed before, but hey, it's 2021, why not? This one, well, I'll get to its care later, but let's just say, this one tough mother. Over here is a new addition. I'm going to tweak the camera just a little bit, you can see. That is a Haworthia savanna. I cannot find a secondary scientific name, so Haworthia savanna is all I know it as, but as you can see, it's almost agave looking. It almost looks like an aloe, because Haworthias, Gasteria, and Aloes are closely related. But it's a Haworthia, and they know that because of those tubercles, those little dots, and I'm not sure you can see them, but they're little dots on the stem. In fact, over here, this specimen, it has them very obviously. Now, I've had trouble identifying this one. It's definitely a Haworthia, but there's so many mini variants of this grouping that it's hard to pin this one perfectly down. I've had this one for a couple years too, and as you can see, this is the traditional looking Haworthia, except it's got the little white dots are things called tubercles, and they're growths that basically may or may not help with photosynthesis. There's a couple articles on this, and it's not precisely clear what they do exactly, other than make the plant look inedible, which I consider a win anyway. Now over here, on this side, we have a very exceptional example of a star window plant. I'm going to tweak the camera again. A star window plant, Haworthia cuspidata. It's called that because the tips have clear patches on them that allow sunlight to penetrate into the plant, allowing it to conduct photosynthesis with a bare minimum of area that can be damaged by the heat of the sun. This is an adaptation to an arid climate, particularly those of Africa. You're going to see a lot of this in this conversation. So, the star window plant grouping may or may not be Haworthia. It may be Haworthia plus Haworthiopsis. It may be Haworthia plus Astroloba. In fact, this one here may be actually be classified as an Astroloba because of its clasping stems. Now, moving along. On the corner here, right here, this little buddy, that's Haworthia cooperi varia variety obtusum. It's called obtusum because of the rounded tips. Obtuse means round in Latin, though when you call someone obtuse, it's not a nice thing to say. Now the tips are completely clear, and much like the star window plant in the back, it's full of clear gel. If you hit either of these with a laser pointer, the whole plant lights up, which is really cool. Here's a more traditional star window plant. Now this one's a little mutated and doing its own thing, but this one is Haworthia cuspidata. Same as this, but it's just a different version. This one does this, and that one's doing that, and you do you, and woo! Over here we have a Haworthia patagonia West Joga. I had to double check the Latin, folks. And it looks just like an aloe, doesn't it? It's amazing. And there's no tubercules, and it's got the little teeth on the margin. You'd think this was just a chunky-ass aloe, but it's not. It's a Haworthia, genetically speaking. Which goes to prove that Haworthias and aloes are very closely related, and they duplicate forms. Over here is the prize, is the real expensive prize of the bunch, even though they're still lovely. This is Haworthia truncata. And it's called that. Truncata means cut off, basically, chopped off. It's called the cut glass plant or horse's teeth. And in the last episode, I told you exactly how much I spent for this one specimen and what Plant Mania is about. And here it is again, but I have to have it here for comparison to this entire world of Haworthia forms. Over here we have Fat Albert, Haworthia Fat Albert, which is a cymbiformis. Formis usually means shaped like a cymba. In this case, it's referring to the triangular shaped leaves and or stem tips. It's doing the same thing as the cuspidata over here, but this one has longer stems, as you can see. This one's a tightly packed rosette, and what's interesting is you see this little green thing poking out here? That's the beginning of a flower bud, so someone who buys this is going to get some lovely flowers soon. And lastly, we have this one in the back. This is Haworthia tesselata. Now, tessel means square. Tesselata means square-shaped, or something like that. In this particular case, what it's referring to is the patterns on the leaves, which are like tessellations. Tessellations were a very popular thing. M.C. Escher made a lot of tessellations, where it's shapes that interlock into shapes. Or, if you look at patio pavers, when you have two pavers that are slightly offset called a soldier course, that's actually a tessellation. You're making a pattern out of things that makes a bigger picture, basically. So, tesselata has patterns, subtle, squarish patterns on the leaves, which makes it unique. It doesn't have the clear gel windows like the star window plants, or the star window group, I should say, but it's a thing on its own right. Just like this is, just like that is, just like this is. Just like this. Haworthias are a massive and very, very diverse group. Their care ranges greatly, too, surprisingly. So, one tough mother back here, the Haworthia coarctata, which I like to call the dragon Haworthia because of the reason I outlined before, survives on neglect. As far as I know, it's never bloomed, but that's because I keep taking the stem tips off to make clones of it. I'm thinking I'm going to give it a couple years rest and repot and hope for the best. But what's interesting is its leaves are tough and almost like scales, and they will jab you if you mishandle it. The stems basically grow, and the scales kind of rotate, sort of spiral out as it emerges and goes over the edge of the pot. Here's a good example here. And it'll slowly drape down the side of the pot and slowly grow along the growing tray. It's the example of the tough as hell category of Haworthia. Now, on the less tough category, we have this star window plant, which is probably also a cuspidata. It needs a little bit more water, it needs a little bit more care. It doesn't have the tough leathery coating, so it can withstand temperature variations and other stuff. Same with this one here, actually. It doesn't have it either, but it can withstand direct light. And as you can see, it's on the rebound. This one almost died, and then I nursed it back to health. This one, looking like the traditional zebra Haworthia you buy at Blows or Home Depot, is also somewhere in the middle. It briefly shed its roots and then was repotted, or was given new potting soil and nursed back to health, and now it's doing just fine. If only I knew exactly what you were, little buddy. I digress. The Haworthia West Jogo, I imagine you treat more like an aloe, because, I mean, this is not exactly leathery flesh we've got here on the leaves. Not a very waxy cuticle. And keep in mind, when you talk about the skin of the leaves, that waxy coating on the outside is called a cuticle. I know, Latin be crazy. Am I right, folks? Yeah. Well, this one I imagine you treat more like an aloe, like aloe vera. If you're going to bring it out, gently expose it to sun. Bright sun, maybe, but only for a half day. Do not overwater. You know, that sort of stuff. The savanna, honestly, I've been treating it more like a medium durability Haworthia than anything else, even though it is a Haworthia. The babies, of which I only had a few, I'm only able to obtain a few, developed into these, but long-term care with Haworthias is the great mystery. You have no idea what your individual specimen will do precisely. If I'd have known this plant, which I bought randomly, I believe at Home Depot or Blows, would turn into this, holy crap, I would have bought more of them, but you can't find them anywhere, not this particular variety. I don't even see pictures of it online unless they're my pictures. I might have the only one in the world. No, seriously. You know, this I can get at a nursery. This took me years to find, and now I have one, and now they're selling variegated varieties, and I go, tempting, but I don't like being set up to fail. You know, so there is a lot of variety. You're going to have to do some trial and error when it comes to Haworthias. The basic rules of succulents apply. No wet feet, water as little as you can during the winter, especially during the cold months. They do not like being cold. They do not like frost. So no temperatures below 35 if you can avoid it. Preferably none below 40 if you can avoid it. Though, this one seems not to care. Try not to excessively wet the foliage, because that'll create spots where the water will do one of two things. And I say this because of what they put in tap water, but also because, you know, rain affects plants very differently than you watering with a watering can. And the problems that they might get, root rot, due to roots being wet, even though some succulents will just get root rot at the drop of a hat, even in dry soil. So root rot is a problem, and on the blog I covered how to deal with root and stem rot with me treating a sunset aloe. Also, they may or may not get scale, but that's rare. I've never seen them get any real pests, though related plants do get scale, so be careful. Scale can be treated with horticultural oil. Basic light application, preferably in a situation where it can be allowed to dry up. It can be allowed to go into effect without necessarily clogging up the pores of the plant. I believe that's all we've got for Haworthias, but now that you see the range of motion that you can get with these plants, you understand that there's a Haworthia for every taste. And I'm selling some of them. Cheap plug. Now, as a last thought to plant mania, I covered this in the last episode, and I'm going to repeat this detail. Haworthias are apparently the big thing this year. I don't know why. Haworthias have been around for ages, and suddenly everybody has to have them. Whoopsies. But, I said that this plant was set up to fail when it's a variegated form, and I'm going to cover this real quickly. This ties into plant mania. Breeders will produce plants that aren't exactly good for the plant. So, an all-white variegated plant, right, means that it produces less chlorophyll for itself, and thus it's slower growing because it's practically starving all the time. Not good for the plant. I got the all-green one because that's closer to the natural form, since this is not actually, I believe this is not actually a hybrid, this is just a random natural mutation that produced a species. The variegated forms were half as big, cost about as much, but you could see they were suffering in silence. And I'm not about that. I mean, they're pretty and all, but if you see my collection here, all the plants I've got to offer in the Haworthia collection, they're all green, because it gives them the best chances to survive, produce offspring, become a sale item, become something cool that I can show off to my gardener friends, and there it is. I'm not saying you shouldn't get variegated stuff, but if you see something that is excessively variegated towards the white band, it may not be long for this world. You may get a full year, a couple of years out of it, and then it'll just peter out. Or, if you're lucky, it might revert. Reversion is something you see sometimes in the landscape where, say, a privet bush that was heavily marbled with white and light green suddenly just has this solid green shoot, and then that solid green shoot, due to vigor, takes over, and suddenly your bush is just all green. That happens, and it's actually the plant trying to save itself. Now, normally you would prune off the green shoot because it will choke out the rest of the bush because you want your mutant. But in the cactus world, it might happen, but usually the plant dies long, runs out of energy and dies long before that happens. One of my recommendations for keeping a struggling white variegated cactus alive is to use weak fertilizer. Give it the nutrients to grow that it doesn't have. You can't replace photosynthesis except with high intensity lights and hope for the best. But you can make sure that it's not lacking in the soil nutrition department. Again, I don't recommend buying heavily variegated plants anyway, unless it's a plant that doesn't matter, like golden pothos, which is devil's ivy, but not the marble queen variety, which is so heavily marbled in white that its vigor is just not there. If you want long-term satisfaction, pick the green ones. Pick the green ones that are natural. And by the way, avoid those weird cosmic succulents that like blows that have been spray painted. Seriously, do you think we fools? Purple succulents? I don't think so. That's all I have for you on the world of Haworthias today. I hope you liked this episode. Now, if you do like it, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, make a request for a video at some point. Hit up the blog. Like I said, I'm going to be covering the treatment of a sunset aloe that got rot either through frost or through being wet too long. That plant's doing just fine on the grow tray literally to my right, off screen. So, as always folks, keep them growing, and stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for watching.